Hi, I'm Miss Pliskin, and today I'm building Chateau de Bouges, an 18th century French mansion with stunning gardens. This build was recommended to me in the comments of one of my other videos, and it's just gorgeous. Thank you so much for the suggestion. Plus, it gives me a chance to show a French formal garden after talking so much about English-style gardens in previous videos. If you're interested in my deep dive into English-style gardens, then check out my speed build of a Georgian mansion. I go on and on about the history of English gardens in that video, but now back to France. But before I get into my whole usual spiel about history and architecture and stuff, I just want to slap a giant, I don't speak French and my pronunciations will not be great, disclaimer on this whole video. The whole time, all of the pronunciations. All right, moving on. Chateau de Bouges was built in 1765 and may have been designed by Jacques Gabriel, the architect that designed the Petit Trianon, as it has some similarities. You may have heard of the Petit Trianon. It's pretty famous. It's a neoclassical chateau on the grounds of Versailles, built at about the same time that Chateau de Bouges was being built. This is extremely convenient for me because the content creator Felixander has a whole custom content pack specifically for the Petit Trianon, plus a bunch of Versailles-related content. I'd highly recommend it if you're interested in building in the neoclassical style. It's actually very doable in The Sims. To be honest, I don't see much of a resemblance on the exterior of Petit Trianon and Chateau de Bouges, but I guess there are some similar features inside that make me think, yeah, it's possible this guy was the architect. Plus, it's just a better story to have a chateau that was designed by an architect to the royals. Why let the truth stand in the way of a good story? Chateau de Bouges is not quite neoclassical. It's a very, French-flavored classical architecture style. And just a footnote in case you weren't aware, when talking about architecture, classical means Greek and Roman. So neoclassical designs take a lot of the characteristics from classical architecture, but the primary signatures of a neoclassical design are grand scale, and we've got that. This is technically a castle we're building here. Simple and plain wall decor. And believe it or not, we've got that too. This is actually a fairly simple facade, relatively speaking, I suppose. Simple and symmetric geometric forms. Check. Look at this thing. It's pretty much just a big old box. And of course, lots of columns, which, yeah, we don't have any of those here. So not quite the poster child for neoclassical architecture, but at least we have the prominent pediments. So I'd call it a classically informed style. The movement toward this simplified neoclassical style was a response to the popularity of the Rococo style, which is lavish. Not to say that late 18th century French nobility wasn't lavish. There was that whole revolution thing gaining a lot of momentum at the time, right? But the Rococo style is really something else. It's an absurd amount of ornamentation. Gilded curves, scrolls, vines, asymmetric detailing plastered on absolutely every surface. And I mean, that's just how style works, right? Though you've got a few decades of the Rococo style smothering every facade with just about everything it can take. And eventually it's too much and you're craving some good old-fashioned Greek perfection. And yeah, neoclassical takes over the scene. I also want to point out that neoclassical design is not the same as Greek revival. That is confusing, I know. So if you're wondering if something is neoclassical or Greek revival, usually you can tell because if it looks straight up like a ripped off Greek temple, it's neoclassical. Neoclassical design really takes the scale and grandeur of classical architecture. If it looks like a house with Greek columns on the front, it's Greek revival. Greek revival takes more modern forms and adds Greek detail. Now onto the garden. I cut out so much video of me just maneuvering box hedges around. I show how I did a couple of sections. Basically, I trace out the shape I want with terrain paint, and then I place some reference hedges down first where I know there will be corners or a peak of an arch or something, just to make it easier to make sure I'm being symmetric, and then I fill in the shapes with hedges. It's incredibly tedious and repetitive, so yeah, most of that video had to go. But this garden is such a good example of what I mean when I referred to a formal French-style garden in my earlier videos. These gardens are largely symmetrical with extremely manicured lawns and hedges. Very clean, neat, and orderly. A lot of topiaries too. If you go into debug, there are some topiaries from the Get Together expansion pack that work really well for a French garden. I used the cone-shaped ones for this garden, along with the regular square hedge for the little hedge maze area. French gardens typically have gravel paths, and I started designing this garden using the gravel terrain paint, but I wasn't satisfied with it since I wanted very clean lines, so I ended up using a terrazzo flooring to sort of mimic gravel, but still get the clean edges. I even chose trees to surround the entire garden that look like they've been trimmed into submission. Another important aspect of French gardens are water features. Chateau de Bouges has a large fountain, which I turned into a pool just so that we could get some usability out of it. These gardens will also have a lot of stone features, such as statues, urns, or follies, and no flowers. Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate, but decorative flowers aren't really a thing in French gardens. You might get some orderly rows of lavender if you're lucky, but we're really working with a limited color palette. Green and white, that is all you get. I mentioned in my Georgian mansion video that with English-style gardens, there was this sort of theme to make a heavily planned and engineered garden look natural in order to be kind of a metaphor for nature taking over, the art of man being transformed to the art of Mother Nature. Well, the exact opposite is true for French formal gardens. French gardens are meant to exude man's strength over nature, man's strength over his domain, controlled and executed to perfection. A well-thought-out French garden really shows Mother Nature who's boss. But something French gardens have in common with the English gardens was that it was designed to look good from all angles. If you're walking through it, or if you're looking down on it from above, you may not even get the full impact of the entire design unless you're looking down on it from the royal box seat balcony, surveying your domain in all of its glorious, intricate perfection. The dude who originally owned the aforementioned domain was Claude Charles Francois Leblanc de Marneval. Sheesh, that is a mouthful. Also, apologies to the Leblanc family for any and all mispronunciations. Anywho, Claude was a forge master, and what that meant basically is that he controlled a sizable portion of the French iron industry. The late 1700s was a transitional period in the production of a lot of goods, from artisanal workshops to industrial processes, which consolidated a lot of money, power, and influence, and this consolidation brought with it a newer social hierarchy where non-nobles are now fabulously wealthy. Hey, it's not just the titled gentry that can exploit the masses, we're talking equal opportunity exploitation potential. This social momentum of the nouveau riche had consequences though. Just one tiny facet of the French Revolution was this disconnect between the uber-rich citizens of the so-called Third Estate, aka everyone who wasn't a noble or in the church, and the Second Estate, aka the nobles, where the rich in the Third Estate are like, what the heck, we've got money too, why does the Second Estate get so much preferential treatment? We're not peasants. It was just another sign that the historically entrenched ideals of social hierarchy were being heavily reevaluated. Well, okay, heavily reevaluated is an understatement. I mean, the French Revolution kind of was a big deal. And actually, it turned out that quite a few, like thousands, of these rich Third Estate families bought or made up noble titles in order to gain entry into the Second Estate. And I kind of wonder if there was any regret there during the Reign of Terror. But speaking of acquiring wealth and social status through questionable means, back to Claude. So like I said, Claude made his fortune via forge, but expanded into the cloth business and had the lucrative contract to provide the fabric for the French army uniforms. Not a bad gig. Unfortunately, Claude couldn't handle the responsibility of all that sweet, sweet government contract money and was convicted of embezzlement, lost the lease of his forge, was forced to sell off the castle and all the land to creditors, and eventually retired to a farm in the country with a measly retirement of 2,000 francs per year. Roughly the equivalent to about 200,000 US dollars today. So yeah, Claude was okay. I mean, he was probably pretty embarrassed and no longer living the castle life, but yeah, he got by just fine. This castle is currently owned by the French government and is open to the public for tours. It looks like the place has great reviews online. While I was researching this place, I found some videos that were in French with no English subtitles, so that's not super helpful for me. But from context clues and some help from Google Translate, it looks like they're undertaking a very extensive and well-executed restoration effort. And even though those videos were in French, they were super helpful in getting a sense of what the interior looked like. Also, there's one of those Google Street View style walkthroughs for this building, so you can totally go through the whole first floor and judge me mercilessly for how terribly I matched the actual building to the Sims building. And part of this was the typical trouble of matching the real-life proportions in The Sims, but part of it was also because I didn't discover the interior street view until after I was done building the thing. Silly me assumed that pictures of one of the bedrooms was from the second floor. Nope, bedroom on the first floor, directly off the foyer. My bad. Yeah, I did not build it that way in The Sims. Another thing that helped me out is I found an extremely low-resolution picture of the first floor floor plan, and I used that to kind of judge where to put the servant stairs. So I placed the servant staircase going from the basement to the second floor behind the main staircase, and I placed another one directly opposite from the main stairs that only go between the basement and the first floor, since I wanted a more direct route from the kitchen to the dining room. I have no idea how close to reality this is. I couldn't find any pictures of the basement level or any of the back hallways that lead down to the basement, so I'm just guessing. But in the basement, I put the kitchen, a wine cellar, this is France after all, and the servants' quarters. We're coming up to the end of the build, but stick around to the very end for some glamour shots. I hope you liked this speed build. The garden was a real pain, but hopefully worth it. And let me know in the comments if you have any building or architecture style requests. This build was a recommendation and it was so much fun, so thank you so much for that. If you're interested in architecture and history, please consider subscribing. I have many more of these videos planned, and thank you so much for watching.